All right, so look, welcome to Waikerie. As I said, we're very excited to be here. I know that the town has gone to great lengths to make sure that we have a fantastic stay. They're really working very hard behind the scenes, as are the conference committee organising team. So we're really looking forward to it. Welcome. Let the games begin. And on that note, can I invite our 4 keynote speakers up? So Sue, Paul, Kerry, where's Kerry? And Eric. We'll get you all up here, even though some of you won't be speaking until after morning tea. If we can get you all up on the stage, that would be great. Okay, we've got you all, fantastic. So I'm going to introduce Sue Middleton first, and then I'll sit down and then I'll introduce Paul. We'll have a morning tea break and then we'll come up and hear from Kerry and Eric as well. So Sue's our first keynote. Sue has an impressive CV. I was having a good read of it. Amongst the things she's done, she's been a commissioner of Western Australian Agricultural Produce Commission. She sat on the COAG Reform Council. She's been a chair of the International Institute of Agri-Food Security for Curtin University. She's sat on the Fruit West board, been a wheat belt NRM director, been on the Australian Research Council, and the list goes on. But amongst her other achievements, she's also, in amongst her busy schedule, been awarded a Centenary Medal for the service to rural Australia in 2002. In 2010, Sue was the first woman from Western Australia to be named the Australian Rural Woman of the Year. A fantastic achievement. As I understand it, I'm really looking forward to hearing some more from her. She's passionate about facilitating more investment into research, development and extension. She'll be speaking to us today about the future of Landcare. Can we please welcome Sue?
Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you very much for the invitation to come. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I want to firstly thank Uncle Barney and pay my respects to your elders and your ancestors and the traditional owners of this land, both past and present. My little prayer to myself as I walked along that beautiful river this morning was that I would walk softly on your lands while I was here, but I can't say I will promise the same for your wine collection. Because I can tell you, for any Western Australian, when you land here and you drive through all those beautiful wine regions, you just think, gosh, this is truly an amazing state. I grew up on what I realised later in life was a conservation farm, and I grew up in southeast Queensland near a town called Chinchilla. My dad and my uncle Max thought it was insanity that we were burning stubble, and in the early 1970s they went to Canada and they brought back a blade plough and pioneered a farming technique that later became known as minimum till and then no-till. I think that I had a really privileged childhood as a result, because I understood the process of erosion before I could properly read and write. And my childhood was travelling around in the ute with Dad, or being in the tractor or being in the shed and learning about birds and learning about trees and learning about how everything worked together. So a long time before what we call the Landcare movement, I think that there was extraordinary farmers in Australia who were creating what is the foundation and that I'm going to talk about today. So as you could understand from me telling you that, I think I'm deeply privileged to, all those years later, be able to be the chair of the National Landcare Advisory Committee. Firstly, what I want to do is just show you the landscapes and explain the farming systems where I live, so that you have a bit of a sense of what I'm involved in. It's a family farming company, and obviously because I come from Queensland and I now live in Western Australia, somewhere in the journey I met a farmer and from Western Australia and became part of his farming family. We have just over 30 employees in 4 different locations, and we manage the admin and the finance from a hub at a town called Wongan Hills. And I say that because I know that you're all going to come up to me afterwards and ask me if I know your relatives in Western Australia, and I'm hoping I do, but I apologise if I don't. The original land was taken up in the 1920s, and this is the Broadacre Farm. We call this Mothership because this is the business from which all other businesses have grown. And it's a very straightforward farming system, much like you would have in South Australia. Canola, wheat, barley, lupins is our rotation. We also do oat and hay for the export market, and we also have a direct baler on the back of our harvester, which we sell the straw, we then sell into the pellet market for the export. So the cattle that go on the boats, they get the pellets. We're in a medium rainfall area, which used to be 350 mil to 450 mil, and our average rainfall in the last 5 years has been 220 mils. So we've been through a really interesting journey in Western Australia of restructuring our businesses and our cost base to be able to cope with what is now pretty much year on year what you used to be able to call, 220 mils a drought. We now call it our average annual rainfall. We also have a piggery operation, so we're a farrow to finished pork production enterprise. We have 650 sows in 2 different locations, and this is what our group sow housing looks like. So we grow in outdoor eco shelters. And in the early 2000s, we decided we wanted to get into, we're looking at the climate change scenarios, and we found them quite terrifying because they said we were going to have a 20% rainfall drop by 2050. And we thought, gosh, if that happens, that's going to be pretty serious. The only thing that was wrong about the climate change predictions was that the drop was much bigger and much faster than what anyone had predicted. But we developed a 210 citrus orchard, and we did that because we wanted to both be in an irrigated operation. We wanted to have the opportunity to have something where we could, in essence, and I know every farmer says this, so forgive me for saying it, but we wanted to drought-proof our operation. We wanted to be diversified, and we wanted to have something that we could get into export markets because we saw that as the future. But I really love this photo because it's actually a good metaphor for my life. I'm a really good juggler. If I were to say to you, what's my great ability? I juggle lots of things. And I continue to work in the space between government and community. My background's in rural community development, but I think that there should always be a person who has a on-ground understanding of what's going on. So when you're talking to politicians or you're talking to, the bureaucrats who are developing policy, that there's a person who actually understands what that means when it hits the ground and what the outcomes are going to look like. And I think that's what NLAC is. NLAC is 10 people who were chosen from across Australia for our skills, our experience and our networks. We don't represent any network. We certainly are not the voice of Landcare, and we're not the voice of any of the particular representative bodies in Landcare. So our job is to understand what's happening on the ground and then translate that back in terms of the program settings for the National Landcare Program and advise 2 ministers about what that looks like. So we've been going for 1 year now, and today I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the work that we've been involved in. Quickly, I'm going to whip through 6 quick slides to give you my understanding of what's going on, what are the key drivers in agriculture and why they matter. Shifting world economy, this basically shows, if you look at 1980 across to 2030, is the GDP hotspots. And so that's a story everyone understands, everyone's heard that story. But the thing I think that this slide tells me more than anything else is that 2030 hasn't come yet, and that's where we are going to be sitting in 2030, and that's really critical for Australia. This slide shows GDP per capita. So the size, I'll just explain it quickly, the size of the dot shows you the size of the significance of the market, because that's the amount of animal protein that people eat. If you look at Australia, up here in the far corner, that's basically all the developed nations of the world in terms of the protein we eat. And then if you look at the dots, China's red, India's yellow, Indonesia is purple. Those guys are going to go on a trajectory up to the top right-hand corner. And if you look at the size of the dot we're feeding now versus the size of the dots that we'll need to eat out by 2050, you get a bit of a sense of the job ahead. But it's not just a protein story. Actually, the really exciting thing about what's the opportunities in this is that it's a fruit and veggie story. And particularly if you look at India and India's consumption habits, it's also going to be a grain story. So there's some really important opportunities for us. Challenge is, however, productivity's levelled off. So this is no longer a volume game. This has now become a value game for us. And what's the value that we're going to extract from the supply chain for Australian farmers? This is a volatility graph. We are the most volatile industry in Australia, way above mining. there is no comparison to what you do in agriculture. People say to me, I'm just a farmer. I say, don't say that to me, because let me tell you, what you manage is extraordinary, and you do it with both price and production risk, and not many people can do that successfully. But we also know the scale of the enterprises has changed dramatically in the last 50 years in Australian farming. This one's about 4 years old. It's already out of date, because whilst this says, I think, about 70%, so 30% of the farm businesses in Australia produce 70% of the output, in most industries it's now about 90-10, and that is going to continue. The reality is we're also living in an environment that is really different to the ones in which my grandfather and my father farmed. So what does that mean for me? Big data really matters now. We have a farm, our farm is mapped, every 10 square metres of our farm is mapped, and we know what is going on in every 10 square metres of our farm. So both granular data and analytical capability is reshaping farming faster than any other driver that I can see today. We're currently working on a project to figure out how we can get a tweeting pig in our piggery, because we want to talk directly with people to explain how amazing our pig production system is, because we think we have the happiest, healthiest pigs. I just showed you that picture. It is pig heaven. However, I am called a factory farmer by people who would like to, or people who have a different set of values, I think is the best way to describe it. And the thing a thing that's also important, and that post-normal tells us, is that planning is almost, by the time you've done the plan, you've finished the plan and you've got the plan on the table, it's almost out of date. So increasingly now it's about try, innovate, learn, try, innovate, learn, and just keep that cycle moving as quickly as you can. There's really big opportunities in human nutrition and agri-food. Two of the most interesting developments in Western Australia have been the chia story. How many people here eat chia? Just to give me a bit of an example. So about half of you. How many people ate chia 10 years ago? Anyone? Oh, one. Oh, yay. Obviously been to South America at some stage in your life. Yes, you're nodding. Okay, so Western Australian farmer who did the same thing we did and looked at the climate change predictions and went, oh gosh, I don't want to be a wheat belt farmer. He's a Nuffield scholar, looked around the world, looked at this chia seed, and he said, right, I want to be in the healthy, functional foods category, and then came back, created a share farming model up in the Ord, and started producing chia. And the day I saw him do a presentation and he showed me that Miranda Kerr was tweeting on his behalf, I went, there you go. That is clever. I just want a tweeting pig, alternatively. The other thing that we also know is that disruption is the new norm. So, for example, pig farmers happily working with things called gestation stalls until there was a particular focus on a farmer in Tasmania who was doing some practices that none of us agree with in the industry. There was a court case. Coles then had a look at that, and because of their background with their Tesco's people coming in from the UK, went, right, we're going to go gestation stall free. Felt like it was overnight. There was probably 5 years of hints that that was going to happen, but then the industry had to respond and say, we'll voluntarily go into a process where we will remove gestation stalls from our production systems. So it moves, and this is the interesting thing I think about this, it moves both quickly and slowly. So it moves slowly for a period of time and you'll be getting all the hints that something's coming, and then when it happens, it goes bang and it happens overnight. Live trade ban into Indonesia is a really great example of that. We were very flat-footed before that ban. We didn't know how to communicate about our production systems, and now we've learnt an enormous amount. And if you now look at some of the things that have happened since then, like Karachi, much better response from the industry. So what are some of the responses? I'm not actually going to talk much about this diagram, but I did it about a year ago for a trade conference in Queensland because I was trying to explain what was important now versus the work that we have traditionally done. The first thing I want to say, though, and it's the box in the middle, it's the whole of regional engagement is really, really critical. And this is something we're learning quickly in Western Australia, is it's the level at which both economies and landscapes can work. So the scale at which you work, you've got to pick the right scale. You've got to pick the scale at which people can work and that you can understand systems, and that's really critical. But what we've learnt in Western Australia is that regional is the scale at which we can actually bring landscapes and economies and understand the link between the two. And so we've been doing a lot of work on regional blueprints and also the NRM plans to try and do that. But the reason I draw this diagram this way, it's pieces of a puzzle and they all work together, and you can't be working necessarily on one. You can work on one part of the puzzle and it contributes towards the other parts of the puzzle, but it's important to understand what the whole says. And the one little bit of this puzzle I do want to talk about, which is the one over here about the Build Team Australia story, is I want to talk about your contribution to that, because you've got a really, really important contribution. You've not just made, your legacy matters, the legacy is critical. I wouldn't even be standing here talking to you today if the legacy wasn't there. So let me firstly say everything that you've done to get us to this point is fantastic and extraordinary. We have more work to do, however. But the thing that I really wanted to say about this is that the way we have always thought about the world is that the assets lie in the land and the water. And they lie in the ability to, to put a seed in the ground and grow a food product. The assets that matter now are in the relationships between people. I now spend all of my time working on the relationships because I have decided that they are the most critical asset that we have, and it is where we will make the most difference. So let me push on. The work of NLAC. So NLAC it's a working committee, as opposed to, it is an advisory committee. It doesn't have any statutory function, but the reason I make this distinction that it's a working committee, because it's about a group of people who come with experience and knowledge, but they're there to work. But simply to say we've done a lit review, and what is really critical and important and is now clear out of the literature is that our very highly productive agricultural systems that we have built have also got us and have also led us to a point where we're now very susceptible to shocks. And so it's really quite critical to define what are the investments that help you to manage shock. And so that's the way we've tackled that topic. We're trying to explain this to the government and explain to them that the investments that you make over 25 years are therefore then the foundation that enables you to manage those shocks. So you can't just do one set of programs 1 year and then think, oh gee, the network will be there the following year. You have to invest in these networks over a long period of time. And Landcare promotes the formation of those networks that then allow the emergency responses. They then allow the responses to biosecurity incursions. They're the networks that manage weeds and diseases. They're the networks you can lean on when there's a crisis in the community, when there's a fire, when there's a flood. And you just can't turn that on and you just can't turn it off. You have to invest in it over a long period. And it's really important to understand that the social connection that these networks provide keep people healthy and keep people safe. And certainly in drought, that's critical. That's really, really critical, because you need to have a group of people you can call on to say, we need to put a suicide watch out in this area, we think that this is an issue, we think whatever. The government can't generate that by itself. So keeping that foundation investment in place is really, really important. So that's what that work is fundamentally, that's why we're doing that, to explain that one. We found this great little bit, and I just quickly wanted to flick it up here. I know you're going to know this and you're going to say, oh, that's sucking eggs, but it's not just that this is the characteristics of a resilient farm business, but when I read this, I went, this is actually the characteristics of what a resilient network looks like as well. And this is really important, because a lot of the time we struggle to explain, why are you doing the people stuff? Why is that capacity building? Why do you want money to do that stuff? Well, sometimes the on-ground work is critical, but it's not as important as continuing to invest in the people and the processes. The second body of work that we've been working on is the economic impacts of Landcare. The reason we did this, can I tell you, and you're all going to howl at me, and appropriately so, it is the lens that was missing. So we found a lot of work that explained the importance of the social capacity. We found a lot of work that explained the environmental impact. We could find no work that explained the economic impact of Landcare. So we have done a very short research project, but an absolutely foundational research project, where we cut through we took 3 sectors, dairy, cotton, grains industry in Western Australia. We then cut across those industries, and we said we're looking at the commonalities in there. There was some farming systems approaches which have allowed a level of innovation which has driven some good outcomes, so some kind of economic outcome in these areas. What we found is that there are very clear key on-farm impacts, and they're both yield and income impacts. And it's also not just about that, but it's about the space between people's heads and the fact that people were responding better, and that was clear from the research as well. We found in excess of $1 billion of direct economic market value from 3 case studies. We could have kept going. We don't think we need to. We're fairly clear that the economic impact from Landcare is fairly significant, and that the only difficulty in describing this to as you can see from what's happened overnight, where you have very short political cycles and you have poll-driven policy. The challenge in this is that there's really significant time lags between the investment and achieving impact, and in some of the technologies we looked at, 12 to 15 years. So you need to invest for 3 to 4 cycles of government, and then that's really quite critical. So headline findings. Okay, beautiful, I need to wrap up. The headline findings. What we have seen from this work is that continued investment in Landcare, along with independent evaluation of practice adoption, can be used to brand Australian agriculture and improve global competitiveness. Why do we say that? I just want to tell you one quick story to exemplify it. Our orchard manager's just been to China. He's been over there at the Fruit Logistica, also been to Hong Kong. In China, they grab South African fruit and they repackage it. They have a facility where they do this packaging. They repackage it and package it as Australian fruit. And why do they do that? They do that because our brand is known to be safe and clean and good and healthy. Our food is good for you. That's what people know about Australian food in the international markets. So what we wanted to do then is to say, well, if this foundation is a big contributor to that brand, what's the system? What's the thing that you have to invest in? How do you inform policy, and how do we explain to government, hey guys, you've got to do this for 25 years? That's a big ask of any government. And what we have developed out the back of the economic work is a systems model which quantifies the economic impacts, and we're trying to link that back into the merit system. So I'm going to skip over that one to finish. I want to tell you about some work that I have seen recently done in Queensland, and I want to tell you, for a specific reason, I want to tell you about this work. Landcare has created a really strong legacy, and it's a fantastic foundation, but it's really hard to measure the investment in people and the space between people, and it really is going to matter that we can... I know you're probably going, gosh, don't people understand why this makes a difference? We have to explain it to people who we need to be able to explain what the process is and how you invest in this. Terrain, which is an NRM group in Queensland, have developed a phone app, and it does digital recording in field. This is what it looks like for any of the community groups who use it, but it measures the people's stuff. So it measures stuff like what the interaction is, who the partners were, who the players were, and then it then measures the effectiveness and the quality of the interaction, because the partner actually evaluates your work. So it doesn't lie, and it aggregates up an enormous amount of data across an organisation, an NRM organisation, and the partners actually are saying what the quality and the effectiveness of those relationships are like. What it ends up looking like is a story map. This lives on their spatial portal. So for me, my 5 new tests, I have to tell you, after having travelled around the country and talking to a whole range of people in different states, is it new economy? Not old, because we're going to really need to understand what the new economy means. Are there people in their 20s sitting in their room? And if there's not people in their 20s, and let me tell you, and now that I'm grey-haired, I have absolutely no bias against the elders, but it's really quite critical that we have young people driving this, because they understand the technology and they have a different capacity to communicate than what we do. Does it work across commodities? Because we've always worked in silos in commodities. Does it start at the market and work back from the market? The chia story. And does it focus on collaboration, not competition? Because fundamentally, For me now, if it doesn't meet those tests, it's probably not going to work in 5 years' time, and that's the work I'm fundamentally interested in. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you today. I'm going to be around until tomorrow morning. Very, very keen to meet as many people as I can, hear your stories, understand what it is that we need to understand for the work that we're doing. Look forward to meeting you. Thank you.